Should we get the show on the road?
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Backseat Designers, the podcast where three friends sit down and bitch about adventure games and other types of games, but mostly adventure games. I am Trolls, the Space Quest historian, and I am joined today by two of my closest, dearest, bestest pals in the whole wide world, Mr. Frederick Olsen.
Hello?
And Dr. Gareth Millward.
Hello.
It's a very esteemed academic accent you've put on today, Mr. Millward. Dr. Millward.
I'm just excited.
Oh, well, that's good, because we do
that
have
makes
a lot
one of us.
Ding. Frederick is terribly flaccid right now. Anyway, we do have a lot to be excited about, and we do hope that Frederick's flesh noodle can get in on this action, because we are today talking about breaking the fourth wall. Full disclosure, we've already been breaking the fourth wall a lot before we hit record. We had a number of false starts because we're rambunctious sort of lads. But the topic that we're about to cover is, of course, like I said, breaking the fourth wall. So before we get into discussing what that actually entails in terms of game design and get into our usual rambunctious banter, we actually do have voicemails this time around.
Yay!
Wow!
What
We
in
do
the
as well.
fuck happened?
My flesh noodle is no longer limp. It's alive.
Frederick is now hard. Will you see what you've all done?
It's stiff like an uncooked spaghetti.
So we are not sure what happened. I mean, we've actually got people who are listening and interested in the show. I thought we were just doing this for ourselves. But we've actually got two
Clearly somebody's got something over them.
Well, my mom tunes in.
Really?
No.
I hope she doesn't speak English.
No.
But anyway, we've got two voicemails from two very esteemed gentlemen. One of them we kind of cheated and put into last week's little bumble of an episode. And we're not going to apologize, by the way, for that episode that didn't happen last weekend. We're just going to completely gloss over it, which is what I'm doing now. Glossing. This is me glossing. We are, however, going to listen to Francisco Gonzalez's voicemail once again, for those of you who didn't tune into last weekend's debacle. And then we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to listen into voicemail number 2, which I will also set up in an equally dramatic fashion. And we haven't actually listened to that one, so we are going to be completely in the dark and spontaneous about it, and probably swear a bit too. So, with you gentlemen's permission, should we just get into Francisco's voicemail?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got the machine here. I'll crank it up. And before we go, I apologize to Francisco Gonzalez for missing out a Z.
You have 2 new messages. First,
We're high-tech.
new message.
Hello, Backseat Designers. This is Francisco Gonzalez, also known as Grundislav, and I have one thing to say about breaking the fourth wall in adventure games. Please don't do it. I mean, in comedy games, maybe. But in any other type of game, it really just cheapens it, takes you out of it, and 9 times out of 10 it's not done in a funny way. So, don't do it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, let me just...
Hello,
Francisco
Gonzalez. This
No.
is with you in your
No
God,
in-jokes.
Oh,
no
you're no
the fourth
fun
wall.
anymore.
That's not even breaking the fourth wall. That's just taking a piss inside someone's apartment. No, what struck me when I heard this voicemail was that he said, it's okay for comedy games. It's not okay in a serious context. And I was going, can I think of an example of fourth wall breaking that isn't in a comedy game?
We talked a bit about that, didn't we? And you did bring up one example, which is, it's not purely an adventure game, but we're not purely about adventure games all the time either. But if I may mention the one that you brought up, and then obviously
yes.
you can elaborate on it. It's kind of, with David Bowie and all, it's kind of appropriate. It's Omicron, the Nomad Soul, the premise of which is that you are actually in a computer game. Which is, I've never played it, but I've read up a bit about it, especially since David Bowie's death, since he's in it. And apparently the fact that you're in a computer game is something you discovered during the course of uncovering the story.
Oh, no, not even that. No, it basically, when you start the game, there's no title screen. It just flat out tells you, the main character pops up on a black background and goes, now I'm going to transfer my soul into your body. And you just sit there as a player going, what the fuck is this guy on? So that means that when you die in the game, your soul is being transferred into a different body. You just awake. Like if you get this guy killed, you just wake up as a nurse somewhere instead. And I'm dead serious. It happens. Oh, wow. Sorry, I was kind of breaking your concentration there, wasn't I?
No, you weren't really, but it doesn't really relate to the fourth wall breaking, apart from the fact that the main character addresses you. I mean, it's more the fact that you do have this. Well, you can probably we can probably discuss for a long time whether Omicron does what it does well. But the fact of the matter is that here is a story which has a serious story which is highly based on breaking the fourth wall. So it has happened in non-comedy games.
Well, this concept is going to come up quite a lot with me because as the reason that I wasn't on the podcast last week, as was discussed, was because I was watching professional wrestling rather than being on the show. And there's a concept in wrestling called kayfabe, which in the olden days it meant that obviously wrestling is, and don't tell anybody, but wrestling is predetermined. They already know.
No.
I know, right?
My illusion shattered.
But in more recent years, when it's been very clear that the audience does know that it's predetermined, what the promotions have done is they've tried to play with people's sense of knowing that it is real, but isn't real, but might be real, and is it though? And so getting their sort of wrestlers in their everyday life to keep up the pretense that what's happened in the ring is actually happening in real life. And those kind of blurred boundaries between reality, between you knowing that this is a piece of art and between them knowing you know that they know that you know that they know. And that kind of, and a lot of wrestling fans and wrestling writers are not clever enough to pull this off. But when they do pull it off, it works quite well. And I think I completely agree with Francisco that unless you're doing it and you know exactly what you're doing, steer well clear of breaking the fourth wall. But if you can blur those boundaries between the playing experience and the narrative and you pull it off, you can do something really, really impressive, I think.
I think if you, like you say, if you do it correctly, because a lot of adventure game fourth wall breaking that I've seen is a lot of, the main character is aware that he's an adventure game protagonist, but he doesn't really do anything with it. He just makes these snarky remarks like, oh, this is a real adventure game puzzle, isn't it? And then he just carries on with the story. There's not a lot of, there may be some side swipes at the player itself, like, why did you make me do that? But other than that, they don't actually really like get in there and play with the formula, make you question about whether or not they are aware of you actually playing them.
Yeah, and that kind of fourth wall breaking that you're describing with the snarky comments and the like is mostly rooted in the comedic games, I feel. It's not really something you see in serious games, because if you just do that, then you've broken the serious tone. If you want a serious game that's fourth wall breaking, you need, either you just need these tiny little hints, or you need a whole story revolving around the fact that you're in a game. One thing that I've thought of was, and you can look that up on YouTube because we did it on BSD Plays, the Danish game Blackout, which I do like to bring up a lot, features this little bit in the introduction where you see the main character sit in front of a computer, and it goes into this sort of regressive thing where it turns out there's this video feedback going on. So what you see is a character sitting in front of a computer, watching a character sitting in front of a computer, watching a character, and these images from from the farthest point from you begin to fade out, towards you. So you're left with the final image, which fades out, renders the screen black to imply that you're a link in this chain. You are the final guy sitting in front of the computer watching this feedback loop. And that's a nice little setup, I think, and the game doesn't really allude to it apart from that, but it works.
I think so.
Danish pretentiousness.
It's pretentious, but it works.
Go ahead, Doctor.
No, well, I wasn't involved in that video, so I can say this with a certain degree of separation. It's a long watch. I wouldn't watch it all in one go, but that video that you two produced on that was very, very good and is worth looking at. And I'm not going to take any of your abuse. But I mean, that's kind of the problem. Actually, I think it's in order to do it properly and not have it as just a throwaway gag or even a gag that kind of breaks the immersion of the experience. You've kind of, I don't know, you've got to do it very well, and art pieces are really the only ways that you can do that. And I don't know, I never go into an art piece unless it's very, very well done with anything other than cynicism. So my fourth wall is already broken.
Or if there's tits. If there's tits.
Especially if.
Well, you will wind up becoming pretentious to some, degree, because doing a game that knows it's a game might also kind of imply to the player that you don't really have faith in the game itself. Do you want to create a game that stands on its own merits or not? Because if you do this self-referential type thing, it may just make people think that, well, they've got a story, but they don't really believe in it. They don't believe it can actually exist on its own terms, so they have to make it self-referential.
That is an amazing point, actually.
That's a very good point.
That there are so many, sometimes with comedies and sometimes with the dramas that want to add those sort of cynical kind of punches to it. You do get that feeling that they don't trust in it. And I think I'll probably save my entire thought on this for the After Dark, because I don't think most of our listeners really want to hear about it. But I think it's a real problem in a lot of films, television, video games over the past 10 years, that they've relied far too much on cynicism and fourth wall breaking to cover the fact that they have no story.
I agree. We should take it up on After Dark, but yeah, look at look at any Marvel movie. I mean, those things thrive on in-jokes, especially with Deadpool coming out now, and people are saying it's amazing, but you do have these films that don't really believe in themselves, don't you? It's not like Tim Burton's Batman, who just existed in his own space. You're very much made aware that, well, this is not real. You're just being entertained. Anyway, enough with the movies.
Yeah, you guys are preempting the After Dark bit. I also wanted to pick up on the can you do fourth wall breaking in a serious connotation. Let's leave that for the After Dark. Let's skip on ahead to the second voicemail that we've got from our dear friend Brian Demodulated Devons over at the Square Waves FM podcast. Hello, Brian. Hello, Bianca. Let's check out what he has to say. And bear in mind, we have no idea what he's going to say. And it's 4 minutes long, so strap yourselves in. Light a cigarette, do whatever.
Second. New message.
Hey there, guys. It's Brian from Canada. I understand that you're doing a show about breaking the fourth wall, so I thought I'd pitch my 2 cents in. I wanted to just briefly talk about a game that I enjoyed as a kid, Leisure Suit Larry 3 by Al Lowe. It's hard for me to be objective about this game. I'm nostalgic about it because I enjoyed it when I was younger. So it's arguable whether it's actually a good game. It has a pretty big variety of puzzles and mechanics and situations that you find yourself in. Some of them are silly and nonsensical, and some of them are logical. But overall, I guess the question is whether it's really a cohesive experience. And I suppose the thing to look at more than anything else would be the ending. So spoilers. I hope the statute of limitations is up on this 20-plus year old game. At the very end of this game, you have to first, you Leisure Suit Larry, and your girlfriend, Passionate Patty, find yourselves suspended over a boiling cauldron, having been captured by these cannibalistic pygmies. And hopefully you were clever or lucky or whatever enough to have picked up a magic marker pen in Passionate Patty's lounge musician room, where she plays the piano professionally, at the very beginning of her campaign. If you didn't, then it's a whole Walking Dead situation, and you have a lot of stuff to replay, unfortunately. Assuming that you have this magic marker, because it's magic, you draw a door in thin air, and you and Larry crawl through it as your cage is descending into the cauldron. I don't know about that, right? So you go through your magic marker door, you fall through space and or time, and find yourself landing right on this big table where they are recording physically these special effects for the game Police Quest 2. You've landed inside the Sierra Studios, and they have all these like practical effects rather than computer programming effects. It's a really cute idea, actually. And so you and Passionate Patty walk around through the Sierra Studios just trying to find someone who can tell you where you are and help you kind of conclude your story. You walk through a King's Quest area and you see Roberta Williams yelling at Rosella because she fails to climb up this slippery whale tongue.
Very
and at
erotic.
the very end of the game, it kind of cuts out and shows a first-person view of Leisure Suit Larry kind of on a recliner in this beautiful California log cabin in the wilderness, working on a laptop and programming a game. And the game he's programming is Leisure Suit Larry 1, so he's kind of retelling his own story. And it's very much a happily ever after kind of an ending, which is sort of an antithesis, you might say, to the whole Leisure Suit Larry just his whole raison d'etre, right? He's kind of the lovable,
Canadian,
questionably
French
loser who doesn't always
Raisins.
get what he wants, but usually gets what he deserves. So it's a really serene, happy ending for this character, and he ends up with Passionate Patty, his true love, because despite misunderstandings of the Leisure Suit Larry series, what he really is looking for is love and not just a fling.
Yes.
So that explains why Leisure Suit Larry 4 had to kind of never happen, and then the next game was Leisure Suit Larry 5, where he has amnesia, and because Allo had trouble explaining how Leisure Suit Larry would go from this idyllic ending to having to be in peril once again. So anyway, I've gotten a little off topic, I suppose, there, but that's just one little reminiscent experience that I remember about breaking the fourth wall, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it. Cheers.
That's a very good example, actually, and it's
That's a very, very good one.
It's certainly an example that I loved. It's comedic in nature, certainly, but it's interesting that we didn't think of that in preparation for the episode, because it's kind of unique.
What preparation?
Boo. It's kind of unique in that while it is comedic, it's also strangely sincere. Like Brian says, it is very, very sweet.
And it's not one of those looking at the camera going wink wink nudge nudge. It takes a very loving kind of swipe at how Sierra how we as kids imagined that Sierra were making games, like point the camera at Rosella and then shout at her for climbing up a tongue wrong. It's almost childish in a way, but in a very good way.
It also kind of makes Larry himself more endearing, because all the embarrassing stuff in Leisure Suit Larry 1, 2, and 3 are basically implied to be him telling his story. So he's a very self-deprecating guy all of a sudden.
That was one of the things that came out.
Oh, sorry, but I'm just going to say, at no point during the ending to Larry 3 does he ever point at the camera or at the player and go wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
No.
He never acknowledges the player at all.
It just happens to him.
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead, Doctor.
that's one of the things that I think is quite. I mean, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'll save that for the after dark. But
Ding.
the two things that kind of came out of that for me were, one, you need to have a lot of confidence that your audience sees your work the way that you do. And I think a lot of people jump to in-jokes before their audience has really got there. We're guilty of that, very much so.
Certainly.
But the other thing that kind of came out of that, which blew my mind, was that, oh, hold on, the fact that there wasn't a Leisure Suit Larry 4 in itself breaks the fourth wall. And Al Lowe managed to break the fourth wall by not making a game. What a genius.
It's also called,
Yes.
it's a kind of official title is Leisure Suit Larry 4, The Missing Floppies. At least I think Al himself has referred to it as that.
Somebody really should have a Skype conversation with Al Lowe.
Oh, yes. And try recording it.
That's
you fucking
a low
cunt.
blow. Wow, Gary, Dr. Gary Millett, you're a cunt bubble.
I think we're going to have to get out the censor bleep on this one.
But no, we're not. What's wrong with a little cunt bubble to cheer up your days?
I think it was. I think it was the name Gary Millett he didn't like.
Yeah, I don't like that.
All right. But something that Sierra always kind of did was break the fourth wall kind of internally. I mean, you look at the Space Quest 1, for instance, when you hit the Do Not Touch button and you end up in either Conquest of the Longbow or King's Quest 1. And some might say it's like a cynical marketing plot. Hey, look at the other games that we did. But it's also kind of you kind of get the sense that these games all sort of exist within the same continuum. Not that they exist in the same world or with the same, backstories and all that, but they sort of exist within this, Sierra family bubble, not to get all mushy
the
or
same
anything.
Universe, and LucasArts did the same. You got all these glyphs of Max the Rabbit in Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and the LucasArts logo, and you have all these little nods that hey, you're playing a game.
Well, I'd more call those in-jokes, where the fourth wall breaking in Sierra games. I mean, look what happened to Leisure Suit Larry 4 in terms of Space Quest 4, where the Vohol virus was picked up by a search and rescue team and installed into the supercomputer in Space Quest 12, and then boom. So they tied together Al Lowe's fourth wall breaking by breaking the fourth wall themselves in that internal sense, and then making it an entire plot piece. And it's, when you step back and look at it, at first glance, it just seems like, I see what you did there, guys. But when you take a step back and look at it, it's actually quite ingenious.
It is quite amazing. It's a little, to bring up a completely different genre, not within games, but within music. It reminds me a bit of something Frank Zappa had, which was something he called conceptual continuity, which was that you would have not conceptual, conceptual. Are you an academic or not? Anyway,
what academic who swears a lot.
What Zappa did was he would have, probably albums apart. He would have songs that referred to each other. He would have these characters and situations and words that went from song to song. So you could listen to a song from 67, and you'd listen to a song from 81, and there'd be a callback. And you'd go, hey, I know that. It's kind of that same thing going on. It's really an interesting mechanic that I think game developers should try using a bit more. And then we're back to the confidence. Do you have enough confidence in your product to do something like that?
Actually, I think games designers rely on, certainly by the mid-90s, we're relying on that far too much, actually. I think there's far too many in-joke references and back history in... certainly from a series that I've overplayed, Space Quest 6, there's a lot of reference back to other games, other Sierra games, and other kind of things. And I think when it's done well, and it's done every now and again, like the Manic Street Preacher song, "Your Love Alone Is Not Enough." One of the lyrics is "You stole the sun from my heart," and that kind of reference back. I don't know. And I think this is the way that this conversation was originally designed to develop, but that I think there's a real difference here between. I think actually, we need to settle on, is there a difference?
Yes,
the in joke and breaking the fourth wall.
Exactly. That was what I was going to bring up. Is that when you're talking about breaking the fourth wall, at least to me, you're talking about involving the player, or at least making the player aware that they're playing a game, or making the protagonist or NPCs in the game aware that they are in a game or that they are fictional characters. In joking, making references to other fictional content or bits and pieces and such. For instance, Jacob Janerka putting a purple tentacle as graffiti on one of his buildings is not breaking the fourth wall. BTs is not breaking the fourth wall. It's an in joke. It's a reference. Some people are going to get it. Some people are not. It's not consequential to the story, and it's not fourth wall breaking.
Well, it's kind of interesting, though. Wouldn't you say that some in jokes are kind of inherently fourth wall breaking? Right? I mean, you've got the Sierra games in the same cosmos. I'll buy that, but having Purple Tentacle in Paradigm either implies that Paradigm is taking place in this universe or in another universe where Day of the Tentacle exists, because otherwise how can he be there? or it's breaking the fourth wall. Yeah, it's not that kind of fourth wall breaking. I'll agree with that. It's not George Lazenby looking into the camera and going, "This never happened to the other fellow." But it's fourth wall breaking in a sense, I'd argue. It's not the main kind of fourth wall breaking we're talking about. No.
A good in-joke should only break the fourth wall for people that are in on the joke.
Yes,
and a bad
I agree.
in-joke is one that sticks out like a sore thumb to 80% of the audience that haven't got a flying fuck what you're on about.
Yeah, exactly. Where you go the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and your audience just sits there going, "What the fuck are you on about?" A good in joke is, to me, is one where you're made aware cleverly that the fiction that you're participating in, participating in an adventure game sense, the fiction that you're participating in is aware somehow that it is fiction, or the author itself is aware of it. Like if you have a narrator in the game, for instance, you could argue that the narrator in Space Quest, or in any Sierra game for that matter, is fourth wall breaking, because where does this voice come from? Is it the voice in the player's head? Is it the voice in the main character's head? That could be fourth wall breaking, but by and large, it is being able to sort of break the distance between the player and the game world itself.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is that a lot of the examples that you've pointed out of fourth wall breaking are not necessarily integral to the plot. Those in-jokes are things that you can discover within the universe that you're in. You might notice them in the art. You might use your parser or your interactive icons to discover that joke in the text or in the voice. But, you don't have to press the do not press button in Space Quest 1. You don't have to die in Leisure Suit Larry 1 and end up being taken into the Sierra factory and scrapped for parts.
That's a good one.
Those things are in there, and they're great fun to those people who understand the universe and understand the games and all that kind of stuff. But you don't have to participate in that or even understand it to get enjoyment from the game. And yet there are some games every now and again that almost require you to have a prior knowledge that probably oughtn't to be expected, and they just stick out like a sore thumb, and they're just a bit off.
Can you name examples just to really get the blood flowing?
Yeah, a professional podcaster would have prepared for that.
Sorry. Okay, I'm going to turn the tables then and say one of my favorite examples of fourth wall breaking is in Monkey Island 2. I know the monkey wrench puzzle gets a lot of shit, and probably deservedly so, because it is shit. It is one of those what the hell. But I do like the little tiny throwaway that Guybrush goes, and what is this? He walks up the waterfall and there's this big pump pumping the waterfall over, and he just goes, "What is this doing in a pirate game?" And it's never mentioned again. It's not brought up again. He doesn't go wink, wink, nudge, nudge all the time. It's just one of those things where you start to, because it pays off at the end. Once you realize that you're in this, you're a little 10-year-old kid who's walking around this amusement park. That's the first sign where you sense that, okay, not everything is as kosher in this game world as you're led to believe.
But is that fourth wall breaking, though? Because he's not necessarily in the game. A spell has been put on him, which, a common interpretation is that Guybrush Threepwood was a kid all along who's just lost in a theme park making up these stories in his head. And of course, they completely ditched that with the sequels. But at no point does he imply that he might be in the know that this could be a computer game.
Yes, he does. The line is, "What's this doing in a pirate game?"
Oh.
So, which in itself is fourth wall breaking, and possibly not even the clever sort of fourth wall breaking. What I like it because it does acknowledge the player in a way that the game hasn't up until this point.
I don't necessarily think the fact that he's mentioning
ladies and gentlemen, is a podcaster that has done his research.
No, I just played the game. What I liked about it is that it pays off in the end. It's not just the existence of the pump itself is what pays off in the end. In that you're just going, wait a minute, what is this doing in a pirate game? And then then you get into those catacombs at the end or whatever, and you really start to see the world unravel around you.
The fun thing about that is that if you look back at Monkey Island 1, you can see a lot of I don't know if they planned this from the very beginning, but I mean, what is the grog vending machine doing there? You can see a lot of
like little anachronisms.
Yeah, you can see a lot of little anachronisms that you just kind of shrugged your shoulders at and went, well, it is a comedy game.
No, not if you're a historian. You cannot put up with that kind of shit.
And we've got two historians on this podcast. We've got a real one and a fake one. And then we got Fred.
Yeah, hello.
Hello, I'm over here. Okay, so...
I think I probably should say at this point, because we've been quite negative about where it's gone wrong. When fourth wall breaking is done well, it is the best thing ever.
I thought Brian brought up a pretty great example of where it's done really, really well.
Yeah.
So which is actually because I want to get back to Gonzalez's voicemail where he just says don't do it, and by that he's sort of preempting that game designers will take the easy route. We'll just have the protagonist constantly comment, well, this is a shit puzzle, isn't it? And why am I even carrying this thing around? I must have endless pockets, etc., etc. Those easy kind of fourth wall breaking moments where he's talking directly at the player.
I think that's a shame, though, that he's implying that, because I mean, by that definition, people shouldn't be making adventure games, because so many adventure games are taking the easy way out by looking backwards. I do think it's a shame to deny yourself of something that could be a great tool, and it's not an easy trick to pull off, as Gareth just stated, and as we have stated several times already. It's not easy, but it can be pretty fucking good if you know where to go with it.
But we've covered this in a previous episode in this series when we were talking about mature themes, that when is breaking the fourth wall a really good way of telling a story and a really good way of doing something to sort of enrich your game? And when are you using fourth wall breaking as a crutch because you've got nothing else? When are you using nudity as a crutch because you've got nothing else? When are you using ultra violence as a crutch because you've got nothing else? I think that's the problem.
And my point being, when you're using 16-bit graphics as a crutch, then maybe stop doing it.
Yeah, far too much of that.
So Gonzalez's argument is pretty good if you if you take it to a more abstract level where it's just don't use things as a crutch. But to which I would say, no shit, Sherlock. Of course you shouldn't.
Well,
don't say that to Francisco. He's lovely.
He's a lovely gentleman. Sorry, Francisco. I didn't mean to imply that you're related to Cunt Bubble Bunny Snatch.
He's so pretty, though.
He's a very handsome gentleman.
Okay, I was just going to go around the room and just have you guys rattle off favorite examples of fourth wall breaking adventure games, and then I have a little thing that I would like to bring up that Fred might have some objection to, but let's go with the good things first.
It doesn't involve a leprechaun, does it?
No, and it doesn't involve flesh noodles either.
Oh, good.
Maybe cunt bubbles.
I can live with that.
Okay, Fred, we did obviously try to prepare some examples. These are the ones I'm fishing for. We did try to prepare some examples that we want to bring up that involve fourth wall breaking. So Mike firmly pointed in Fred's direction.
Well, this is where I'm disappointing. I don't actually know, because I think we've brought up most of them already. I mean, I got to bring up Blackout, and you got to bring up Omicron and Monkey Island 2. It turns out that I don't know that many games that pull it off in a great way. I mean, certainly you've got stuff like Space Quest 6 and one that I worked on, obviously, Vohal Strikes Back. But those are the I thought you were going to bring up Tesla Effect. Well, those are the easy way outs, because it's just kind of joking to the player that it's a game. But I like the stuff we've been talking about, where you could make a game where the whole plot revolves around being in a game. And, certainly there are shades of that in Brian's voicemail. But I don't really have any examples apart from what we've been talking about, I'm afraid.
Well, thankfully, Fred's given me 3. The first one's Tesla Effect, as he mentioned. I think that the first sort of 3 or 4 days of Tesla Effect, they break the fourth wall sometimes intrusively when you click on an object that reminds you of a past game. which isn't particularly good, but it does fill you with that kind of nostalgia. And the whole point of that project really was it was off the back of a Kickstarter nostalgia project, and they produced this game with the help of the fans. So it was very much a sort of an ode to the backers, pretty much. These are the you produced this game, and therefore we're giving something back to you in a way that you'll understand. And I think it towed that line. I know that Richard Cobbett might disagree in some cases, but I think in the first few days of the game, it toes that line.
He'll disagree with anything.
The second example is the one that Fred was involved with, which was Vohor Strikes Back, which is
I actually found that way back in 2002.
Shut up, Fred.
Of course, I was only a T-boy back then.
And you haven't worked your way up the ladder ever since.
Oh, I really have.
This was back when he was the insufferable Pratt over on the Subspace channel.
Well, I was an insufferable 14-year-old Pratt. Now I'm an insufferable 27-year-old asshole.
It just reminds me this all reminds me of my own mortality. Anyway, the thing that I really loved about that game was that from the word go, the writers and everybody involved with that project went, fuck you, we're Space Quest fans. If you don't like it, turn it off. And I completely got on board with that. Absolutely. And that entire project wasn't to create a commercially successful game, because God knows it wouldn't be, but it was to produce a game that was fun for. I think, Fred, you might disagree with this, but you produced a game that would be fun for a very specific forum of Space Quest fans.
Yes,
not even for the general adventure game community.
We did get a lot. I don't want to get into the whole, I don't want to get into the whole nostalgia bit, but we did get a lot of flack from what you could argue would be the more mainstream members of the Space Quest community, who looked at our little gang and went, I don't really like the humor these people have.
Well, I'm British, and I grew up on Father Ted and Monty Python and Blackadder, and I loved it. So, I loved the entire game, so I'm not going to say anything bad about that.
And if you go to sqvsb.com, you can download this little nugget of fun for absolutely nothing.
And if you go to Fred's apartment, you can find his nugget of fun
under his spreadsheets.
And what the hell was I going to say? Oh, actually,
Gareth was going to say something.
I have my third example after your shameless plug, Freddie. And we discussed this before Trolls deigned us with his presence. Was the entire Space Quest series, which seems to be in its entirety a giant fuck you to Sierra. It seems to be a sort of everything about it, even its existence, is down to the fact that they wanted to take the piss out of King's Quest. The entire series is poking holes in everything that Sierra does. Space Quest 3 and Space Quest 4 are deliberate sort of rebellions against the sort of the production line process that was going on in Sierra. The very first game was an objection to the kind of childlike and saccharine King's Quest. The whole thing, all the way through, is a rebellion within the system that kind of doesn't work as punk rock because it's within the system, but does work because everybody knows what's going on. And the whole thing works so well. And whether that breaks the fourth wall or not, I don't know. But there are certainly elements of it that are very much, if you understand the in-joke, that fourth wall is broken, and broken so well that you just want to play everything that the two guys ever produced.
I do agree, and I think the one scene that jumps to mind for me is at the end of Space Quest 3 when you get into Scumsoft, and you see this row of programmers with two people who somewhat resemble real life people who worked at the time, cracking whips over the programmers. It works as a joke on its own if you have no idea what they're on about, and it works very brilliantly as, like you say, a big old fuck you to the very system that bred them. I remember reading in the Space Quest collection manual that Space Quest 3 enthusiastically bit the hand that fed them, and no shit, it damn well did.
It's a very good joke. I'd argue that it works on 3 different levels. You know, it works well on its own, where you have no concept of programming and you have no concept of the inner workings of Sierra. And then it works for people who are programmers like me, and, you know, you do feel that whip cracking over you sometimes. And then there's the Sierra-centric angle, where you can just tell that they were just going, fuck off, Ken Williams.
So one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is the part where it might get contentious between Fred and me, at least. So I'm actually going to preface this. Would you be okay if we briefly brought up the design idea that we had for the agency?
Well, it's your idea, so certainly. I mean, you're the guy who might wind up with your idea being stolen. But absolutely. Go ahead.
I have no problems, bringing up ideas that I've had for games, because sometimes I just wish that someone would make them.
And just please don't steal it, or at least hire me to develop it.
Oh yeah, because this is not open crowdsource.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. One idea I had, and it wasn't with any intentional fourth wall breaking in mind. It was an idea to sort of mess with gameplay mechanics, but it did turn out to be very fourth wall breaking. And I can safely mention this because when we did the whole, we had a brief about with Agustin Cortez, the sexy beast from Argentina, who was in charge of Senscape. He was briefly on as he actually wanted this game to be made, and he cut out the bit that I'm about to mention. So I can safely bring that up. At some point during the game, the protagonist was going to become very aware that he was in fact a fictional character, that he was under the control of the player, and instead of wink wink nudge nudge at the screen, he would actively rebel against you. So when you gave him directions, he would first of all he would become incredibly suicidal, and he would counter be counterintuitive to your actions. Because he's a gameplay character, he couldn't actually not obey your commands, but he would try to obey your commands in a way that would get himself killed, and you would have to sort of steer him around that. For instance, like he was going to cross a bridge at some point, so if you clicked on the bridge, he would try to jump off it. Or if you directed him to say something at a character, he would say it in a tone of voice that completely belied the intention that you would read in the text. So that was my idea of fourth wall breaking.
It was a very good idea, I thought. The thing is, which was kind of a challenge, because we worked a bit on the script, and I did some puzzle design, which I suck at, trying to flesh this out, and did some character work. And you really do need to take some pretty radical steps to ensure that this bit, which I think is revolutionary, stroking your dick here, doesn't become too frustrating to the player.
Thank you. My flesh noodle is now hard. But yeah, the idea, and again, the idea was not to consciously break the fourth wall, because I think if you go into it with the intention of breaking the fourth wall as your prime motivator, then that becomes like a way too obvious, kind of I really want to ingrate myself with the player. But having the game character actually rebel and flip the bird at the screen and go, "You are not the boss of me," and you just sit there and go, "I damn well am." I thought that was that was an interesting idea. And we had other bits that we were going to put into the game, such as while he's gradually figuring out that he's an adventure game protagonist, little bits and pieces in the game itself would start to reflect the real world. Like you turn on a computer and your own file directory would show up. We even had an idea where it would turn on your webcam and he would be looking straight at you, and your face would appear in the game. And once you turn the game off, he would start sending you emails, like to your actual email suite.
A love interest who seems like she knows something that you don't.
Exactly. So with regards to fourth wall breaking, I suppose what I'm getting at is that this would be an example, not to stroke my own flesh noodle too much, but this would be an example of fourth wall breaking where the intention is not to break the fourth wall, but it is to sort of circumvent the expectations that you have as a game player, to sort of make you aware that you're playing a game and not the characters in the game aware that they're playing a game. So, is there anything we can say pertaining to fourth wall breaking in terms of game design? I mean, we've talked about it in a sort of a story sense.
Not apart from the fact that I think Francisco Gonzalez approach is certainly an easy way out, but I don't necessarily think it's the right way out.
I think Francisco's advice is very good. In the same way, there's loads of advice about writing. Don't talk in the first person, or don't do this, don't do that. Because for most people, you need to learn the rules of good basic writing before you jump into the more difficult stuff. And you shouldn't think that breaking the fourth wall is clever just because you're doing it, or that it's good just because you're doing it.
Rome wasn't built in one day, and you don't go on to write War and Peace for your first novel if you're an aspiring author either. So it's I wouldn't go so far as to say don't do it ever, but I would say don't do it until you have learned the tool that you're holding.
Ding.
Yes.
And I just remembered, for a final example, talking about not, involving the player directly in the game itself, but Leisure Suit Larry 7 actually had a little bit where you could insert your own photo and record your own voice and have yourself be a very, very minor character in the game itself, which is, I suppose, fourth wall breaking in the sense that it involves the player in anything in something other than playing the game. But okay, what I wanted to ask you, gents, for our final little soiree here, what am I saying? Is that we've been talking about
Canadian
fourth wall breaking
French.
in terms of we've been talking about fourth wall breaking in a story sense, in parts of bits of the plot, bits of the dialogue and such. Could we foreseeably, being backseat designers and all, could we foreseeably see actual game design elements that would break the fourth wall, such as, like, for instance, the bit that we were on about where the main characters start sending you tweets and emails when you don't have the game open and such?
Oof, well, not at this stage, certainly.
I think the options are definitely there for really playing around with what it is to be a game player. I'm not sure... It can be done, but I think I'm not saying that the fact that I can't think of anything means it can't be done. But what I am saying is that you'd have to properly sit down and genuinely have a really good idea of how to do it. Something like Underworld, where you've got a really clear Undertale, where you've got a really clear idea of how you're going to do it and pull it off.
Well, a game like Oh, sorry. Please.
No, just saying it can't just be an add-on that you go halfway through. Oh, this would be cool.
A game like Her Story actually kind of did it in a very, very simple way in regards to how it looks, because the whole game features you looking through police investigation related clips, relating to one specific murder case, and you're looking on these on a computer. And you have this view which kind of simulates how it is to look into a CRT monitor. The screen is curved and it's flickering a bit, and you can turn that off. So you can choose to look through the eyes of the character at this computer circa 1995, or you can choose to look at the game world in quotation marks through your own eyes on your own computer.
And now I sense that we're sort of starting to stretch the definition of fourth
You
wall
only
breaking.
say that when I'm talking.
No, I don't. No,
Shut up, Fred.
Another example that springs to mind is a very recent game called Pony Island, which purports to be this very cutesy platformer where you have this pony and you have to jump over obstacles. And the game itself is actually you having to go into the code and reprogram this game so it enables you to activate all these cheats. And it turns out that the game itself is demonic. It's out to get you and such, and you start having conversations with other people, NPCs really, but other people who are plugged into the game at the same time, giving you hints on how to circumvent this devilish computer game. You guys, look that up if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah, it's already got a pony in it, so you don't have to add it.
Exactly. add a pony. Nice callback there.
My kind of thing would be that one of my favorite programs of all time is Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is a story. the program was made in the mid 2000s, and it was a story about a group of people that made a horror series in the mid 80s. And the show is clips of this show from the mid 80s interspersed with interviews with the cast today, in inverted commas, talking about how they made this 1980s horror film series type stuff. And to break the fourth wall completely, Pete Tolman is completely based on this on this show. And one of the great things about it is this way that it plays with nostalgia, but it also plays with history in this sense of, this was the 80s. There were certain things that were done in the 80s that made this possible, and this backstory about how, okay, you see this polished thing in your face, but you don't understand the stories that went you don't understand the stories that went behind it. And it's so well done, and there's definitely scope with the way that I love adventure games, and I love adventure game fans, because you're probably listening to this, but we can be twats sometimes, and the way that we approach these things is completely out of kilter with reality, and sometimes poking at that and really questioning what nostalgia is and whether it's a good thing, and how that actually relates to the quote-unquote reality of doing stuff in the late 80s, early 90s. I think that's something that could really be explored with a good series or a good adventure game kind of done around that kind of way. Mm-hmm.
I agree completely, and I think what we're taking away from this is that if you are a designer and we're supposed to be telling you how to do your job, if you're going to go for the fourth wall breaking, try and do it in an imaginative way, in the sense that it's not just the
Canadian French.
It's not just the main character commenting directly to the player, "Haha, I'm an adventure game protagonist." You can do so much with the, fidgeting with the underlying game mechanics themselves. Not just, inserting the player's own name into the game and have that pop up somewhere, but really get in there and try and see if you can, like Gareth says, for instance, try and make this, retro stylish game that sort of is aware of its retro stylings. For instance, there is a bit in Undertale where most of the game is this, loving old style RPG, kind of low res graphics things. And then you come up across a boss, and then all of a sudden the game completely switches gears on you. It becomes this 3D rendered, really aggro boss character that fills the whole screen. And it's that's an interesting kind of fourth wall breaking. Anyway, we are coming up on the end times, aren't we?
I think we are. Well, only in terms of this episode. No, I don't predict the apocalypse coming anytime soon.
Look outside. There's a big mushroom cloud on the horizon.
Oh, shit!
So, thank you guys for joining me, as always. It's been an absolute horror. It's
not your show.
It's my show, and you guys are just co-hosts. We're doing a Square Waves FM here. I'm the host. You guys are co-hosts. That's a little in joke for you podcast fans.
It's not
funny. My place.
If you enjoyed this horrific banter between three mortal enemies, please do check out backseatdesigners.com, where you can subscribe to the show and have a good laugh at our spelling mistakes. For instance, people who write in on the show, we are completely unable to spell their names. Hi, Francisco. You can also find us on
Gonzalez.
Yes. Good old Franny boy. Oh, he's going to kill me for that. You can also find us on Twitter at BS Designers, and if you want to contribute to Frederick's Coke Fund, there's always patreon.com/backseatdesigners. And of course, you can find the show on YouTube, and you can find us on Facebook. There's a group there where you can go and have group fun. Ding.
Yeah, and one guy who is contributing to my Coke Fund, but is sick of us thanking him, is one Michael Council, a great friend of the show. And he's sick of us saying thanks to him. So I just want to say to you, Mike, man, good guy, good friend, green thumbs from the bottom of my heart. Go fuck yourself.
I'm sure he'll enjoy that. And also thank you to Franny Boy and Brian Boy for their... By God, I'm going to get completely annihilated on Twitter.
Well, I
after
think
this
we've
episode.
made some new mortal enemies tonight.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for your voicemails. Thank you for taking the show seriously, even when the three hosts don't. So, again, say goodbye, Fred.
Goodbye.
And say goodbye, Dr. Gareth.
La plume de ma tante est près de la chaise de ma tante.
I'm
Canadian
British, and therefore
French.
I crave disappointment. Yes, thank you, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and do tune into the After Dark if you want to hear us prattle on more, but at this point, I don't see why you should. We'll see you next week.
No more for today.
Oh, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure being able to swear again. I really have to keep my swearing in check, and when I do the Space Quest Historian thing. Cunt bubble.
Cunt bubble.
Did you say cum or cunt?
I thought he said cummerbold.
Cunt. Humperbold.
Humperdick bunny snatch.
Benedict Cunt Bubble.
Cunt. No, cunt bubble is the first name. You got something like cunt bubble bunny snatch.
Oh my god, I'm pissing myself. Benedict Cunt Bubble. That is absolutely brilliant.
Watch the new episode of Sherlock starring Benedict Cunt Bubble. Only on BBC.
I just picture himself with this constant dribble out the side of his mouth.
I wish I could do a good Benedict Cumberbatch. Right, Watson? He's got this... Benedict Cumberbatch always sounds like... No, sorry, cunt bubble. Well, ironically, he sounds like he has a cunt bubble stuck in his throat. Detective Carey, I think what you're doing is sexual harassment.
Carrie, I view your action as sexual harassment and find your behavior objectionable.
Now fuck off, bitch.
Jesus, we are going to get Tumblr breathing down our necks on this one.
Well, we haven't started broadcasting yet, have we?
I'll be S, you can be J, and Fred will be W.
Mr. S, Mr. J, Mr. W. And we've got our own special Reservoir Dogs here about ethics in games journalism.
Oh dear God. Oh, this is too good.
We're definitely releasing this bit somehow, if only to make up for what was lost last week.